Thank you for tuning in to the BVLOS Blueprint. I'm Adam Zorkelback, and with me is our Director of Regulatory Affairs, Rob Knockenhauer. And today we're going to be discussing the 3 major mistakes commonly seen in waiver applications. Now, Rob, we hear and we've told a lot of the people we talk to when we're talking about BVLOS operations that almost 99% of all waivers that get submitted are not approved. And a lot of that is due to lack of information, and we're going to dive deeper into that today. And attacking the first point here, Rob, one of the biggest things that we see, the number one reason that people are not getting approved for these waivers is not giving enough information about how the complex operation will be conducted. Can we go into what is the information that we're kind of looking for, and how can people kind of battle that?
Yeah, this is great, Adam. It's a good topic and one that I've been thinking about for, well, I mean, basically ever since I got started into this industry and started writing waivers under Part 107. So, just kind of going my own experience with this, when the first waiver request that I wrote, I had put together a concept of operations, and that's kind of what you want to assemble is you wanted to describe what it is you're looking to accomplish for the waiver request that you're applying for. If it's a beyond visual line of sight operation, you want to describe, what it is, how you're going to conduct that operation, and basically define kind of the way the entire workflow of the operation is going to be bounded. And that's really, what the FAA is looking for when they're evaluating it, is to basically to have a full understanding of exactly how you're going to conduct that operation in a way that maintains safety of the national airspace system.
All right, yeah, and I think kind of how to sum this up is, essentially, if you feel like you've written enough, you probably haven't, right? You're really looking to expand on as much detail as you can. You're not trying to give that 30,000-foot overview of the operation, right? You're trying to really get into the nitty-gritty.
That's exactly right. So when you write a con-op, you basically you need to provide details. And so what that means is that when you say that I want to fly BVLOS, so here's a bad example, right? So you say I want to fly BVLOS because I need to see something on the other side of this hill, right? Okay, that's your need, right? The FAA honestly doesn't care about your needs or what it is you're trying to accomplish. What they're concerned about is like how you're going to do that in a way that's safe. So when you say, if you're using a visual observer to give yourself an understanding of what the air risk is, or even if there's areas where you could be flying over where there could be people on the ground that you need to have an assurance that those people are there, you need to identify in that concept of operations that you're going to have. I'm going to fly over this hill, and the way I'm going to do it safely, and I think that's the key element right there, is how you're going to do it safely, is I'm going to have these basically elements in place to assure that the operation is conducted safely.
All right. I think that's a great point and a great way to kind of start off this talk here, and moving straight into the number 2 reason why we see waivers commonly get denied with the FAA, and that is inadequate identification of risks and mitigations. Just start off by telling us, like, what are risk and mitigations, and how can people write those under the waiver so they can start seeing more approvals?
Sure. Yeah. So, the first thing I'll say is that, the line's a little blurry between the providing adequate information and the risk and the mitigations, because they go hand in hand, frankly. So what the risks are in the case of a beyond visual line of sight operation is, how are you going to have an awareness of what's happening in the airspace surrounding your aircraft or your drone, RPAS, UAS, whatever it is you want to call it, that you're going to have an understanding of what's happening around that aircraft as it's flying beyond the pilot's line of sight. And there's a couple of different ways that you can do that. One is to use visual observers. One is to use some sort of a technology solution for detecting other traffic. And then, more recently, there's the use of shielded operations, where if you're flying below a certain elevation, that you are effectively shielded by the ground from having an interference with another aircraft. So that is a risk. So you have a air risk of flying beyond line of sight. If you're doing like an operations over people type of operation, the way you might want to go about doing that is you identify like what type of area you're going to fly. So, the FAA will grant, operations over people approvals for relatively low risk things in a pretty straightforward fashion. If you can show that you have some sort of a solution in place for mitigating that risk. So in our case, our mitigation strategy for the Centero would be to identify that we're going to be flying over low risk areas and kind of show the reliability of our aircraft to some degree, to give us the ability to do that type of an operation. If you're going to be flying over areas that have higher numbers of people on the ground, there's a higher ground risk exposure to people, and you have an aircraft that is either compliant with the operations over people rule, then you don't necessarily need a permission there. But if it's not, then you look at equipping your aircraft with like an ASTM certified parachute system that'll allow you to do that operation, where that particular parachute has been proven to basically work effectively every time if the drone were to fail and to fall, and so that there wouldn't be actual risk to the people on the ground for injury.
Yeah, and this might be a trick question here for you, Rob, but when you're writing these waivers, and obviously you're making this long list of risk, at any point in the operation, if something were to go wrong, here's how I would mitigate it. But is there
Right.
always a mitigation to the risk, or is it sometimes there's risk that you identify that maybe it isn't worth mitigation, or there is no way to mitigate?
There are definitely risks that you may not elect to come up with a mitigation for, so if it's a low enough risk profile on an area, like if you're flying, like let's say you're flying a right of way in the middle of nowhere, right? And you can't prove it, but it's the likelihood of there being a ground risk or a gathering of people along that right of way in the middle of, rural America is so low that you can basically say that, yes, there is a potential for ground risk, but then you say that there's no mitigation required for this particular risk because it is inherently low. So there are definitely some risk that don't need a mitigation for. So but however, it is important to identify all those risks, because really kind of the big categories become, it's like an air risk for how are you going to make sure the aircraft doesn't collide with another crewed aircraft while it's operating, and then the ground risk to make sure that you're not providing an undue hazard to the people that are on the ground under where you might be flying your aircraft.
All right. Thank you for that, Rob.
Yeah.
And going into the third and our last point on this episode of the BVLOS Blueprint, not providing direct answers to WSEG questions. Rob, can you tell us first of all what WSEG questions are?
Yeah. So the WSEG is the shortened acronym, I guess, for the Waiver Safety Explanation Guideline. And this is a list of questions that the FAA released in 2017. So it was about a year after Part 107 went live that I think there was a realization that there was enough in the industry, people that were applying for waivers in that first year were having a lot of issues figuring out how to satisfy what the FAA was looking for. And so the FAA recognized that they needed to provide somewhat of a blueprint, as we have our BVLOS Blueprint, right?
Yep,
And
that's
a shameless plug for you there, Adam. So as we have our blueprint, the FAA recognized that they needed to provide a clear guideline for how people can actually apply for a waiver and answer questions to satisfy that. And so what the FAA has done is they've used those waiver safety explanation guideline questions as a way is as the metric that they are looking at to evaluate a waiver request. So they have questions for every single thing you could potentially apply for a waiver under Part 107, whether
Mm.
it's operations at night, which is kind of covered under a rule now, or operations over people and moving vehicles, flying multiple drones simultaneously, operations above 400 feet or within weather conditions that the visibility requirements are below a certain threshold, or BVLOS, even the requirements for a visual observer for use in either VLOS or BVLOS operations. So all of that is covered, and there are just very pointed questions about how you actually will do that in a way that's fundamentally safe. And the most important piece of answering those questions that I learned when I went through this, the first couple of iterations of the first waivers that I applied for back in the 2016, 2017 timeframe, was that you cannot make an assumption of common sense. So, my background is, I started off my career as an engineer, did that for a lot of years, and I basically, had a pretty good understanding about how things should be done in a way that was logical and that made sense. And I realized that the FAA does not assume that anybody applies common sense to anything. So unless you write out explicitly, why things are happening, you can't make assumptions that is like, I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but it's like, but you're like, I'm going to turn off the stove because I don't want my house to burn down, right? So you need, and that's kind of obvious that you're going to turn your stove off because you don't want the house to burn down. So, but the FAA is not going to assume that you're going to think to turn off the stove. So it's and that's not obviously not directly related to this topic here, but it is along that line of thinking, that line of reasoning of things that seem like common sense to you. You want to spell out explicitly as you answer those waiver safety explanation guideline questions with an application that you put forward for a waiver from part of the rule of Part 107.
Yeah, and I would definitely say common sense there, but I definitely have fallen into I forgot to turn off the oven every once in a while. So it is important to outline. And, if I had a checklist to go through or a waiver to follow, I would never miss that step.
Yeah. And what's
Go ahead.
great about those questions is that, they're pretty clear and direct, and it's just a matter of going through. And honestly, I spend the most amount of time when I'm putting together new content for a waiver request for one of our clients or for ourselves. The biggest amount of time that I spend most brain cycles on is actually figuring out how to answer those questions and then kind of scrutinizing whatever I put together and making sure that I've done it in a way that kind of eliminates any areas where there could be a question about it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think something that's interesting, and we've kind of answered these three questions, but I kind of want to talk about one more thing here. Even if you were to write the best waiver, you go into the most detail, you're able to identify every risk, and you have these mitigations. If you're not using the right tool or like the right aircraft per se, all that hard work is kind of lost. And can we kind of go into like how important it is to pick a drone or pick a tool that is favorable that will work for these waivers?
It's pretty essential to make sure that you're right sizing your request, right? So you're not going to be looking to do linear infrastructure inspections with a Mavic, right? I mean, even though the Mavic is a great aircraft, and you might be able to do like some limited, like short range BVLOS operations, or if you equipped it with a parachute, you could do operations over people, that sort of thing. It is not the right tool for the longer range flight operations that would certainly be more appropriate for a Centero or another aircraft that is similarly capable of running those distances in our case, we have the assured C2 connection, using the L-site halo that is also part of our safety case to have that is a risk that we've identified as like, whether or not the aircraft maintains link with its ground control station. And so those are right. And it's, I mean, there's a myriad of different things that you need to take into consideration there, but it's definitely a very important to right size your request.
Yeah, and I think, one of something that we see uncommon in kind of that thought process with people that we talked about in the industry, like I think it's important, and kind of this maybe summarizes what you were just saying, but essentially you should identify your project first, find a system that fits the role, then write the waiver around it.
Absolutely.
You don't want to get locked into like you said, like a Mavic for, a 30-mile inspection and have to write a waiver around that. Identify
Right.
your op first, find the right tool for the job, and then get it approved. But yeah, Rob, that's kind of all I had. Was there anything else you wanted to add?
No, I mean, I think this is a great topic, a great thing to discuss, really important. And, we certainly love being able to help folks, get into this space. And so I kind of look at this, as, teaching a man to fish, if you will. It's just, we recognize that, for all of us to learn together to get to a place where we can all, put together safety cases that are acceptable to the FAA to get anyone's operation off the ground to a higher level is important. It's like rising tides raise all ships. So we want the industries to succeed, and for us all to move forward together. So
That's right. If we write good waivers, then maybe we'll see faster approvals from the FAA as well.
yeah, well, yeah,
We never know. We
that's
never know.
yeah, that process is a little bit it's cyclical. I mean, there have been some periods, depending on kind of how their staffing is, where they get through them faster, and then other times
Yeah.
where it takes a little longer. But but it is kind of first in, first out type of thing. So it's you're, wherever you are in the queue is where you are in the queue. It's
Yeah.
like being at the deli counter. So
Yeah. That's right. That's right. Well, thanks for tuning in to another BVLOS Blueprint. Hope you're able to take something valuable away from the three most common mistakes people make when submitting waivers, and hopefully it can improve your waiver writing and your approval process and approval rate. So once again, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on the BVLOS Blueprint.